If the Chapter 4 characters were thrown into a boxing ring, who would be victorious? The answer isn't as simple as you might think, but the game itself provides plenty of clues to help us figure it out. To determine the ultimate champion, we need to break down each Chapter 4 antagonist, analyzing their raw strength as demonstrated in gameplay, along with any additional details revealed in documents, VHS tapes, and other sources. Starting with the Doctor. His physical body isn't seen all that often throughout the chapter. In fact, it probably has more screen time in the trailers, but there is one moment that gives us a solid indication of his strength when he effortlessly lifts the player with a single hand and hurls them down a staircase. This alone confirms that he possesses considerable power, which makes perfect sense given that he's a literal cyborg. Beyond his own capabilities, the Doctor also commanded an army of robotic minions that relentlessly hunted us down through some dark hallways. While not much is explicitly stated about these machines, we can infer that they too were incredibly strong. After all, they were capable of killing the player with their bare hands, and being made of hard metal only reinforces the idea that they were built for raw power, possibly by Elliot Ludwig.
Elliot's machines are nothing to me. The childish fantasy of a naive caveman. They won't settle.
Unfortunately, there isn't a ton of direct evidence available to form a definitive conclusion about the robots or the Doctor's full potential, so with that in mind, let's move on to a character whose strength is much better documented. This character is Yarnaby. In his jump scare, he forcefully pins the player down with his paws before mauling them to death, suggesting that he's some sort of predator, and that's exactly what he is. According to a document, Yarnaby was designed specifically with strength in mind. While his intended role remains unclear, it's likely he was meant to serve as a guard dog for Harley Sawyer, which would explain why he chose to make himself Yarnaby's whole world by isolating the two of them together. But there's even more evidence to consider. During Chapter 4's ARG, real-life documents were discovered detailing orphan Quinn Davidson's test scores at the game station, the very child who would later become Yarnaby. Initially, Quinn's performance in the minigames was mediocre at best, with his highest scores being in musical memory and statues. And according to a document found in Chapter 2, the statues minigame was specifically designed to test physical abilities, including strength. This means Quinn was never particularly weak to begin with. However, his true potential only became evident later, after being manipulated by Sawyer to push himself harder in future tests. Quinn's scores improved dramatically, ultimately earning a 5 in the statues minigame. With this level of physical capability, it makes sense why Yarnaby was assigned a role that demanded brute strength. Additionally, his sheer power might also explain another key moment in the game, when he violently scratches and slams his head against a glass window in an attempt to reach the player, showing no signs of pain or injuries whatsoever. All in all, the evidence overwhelmingly supports the idea that Yarnaby is an exceptionally strong experiment. However, the same cannot be said for Baba Chops, one of the bigger bodies we encounter in a section during Chapter 4. Her primary method of attack consists of pouncing at the player and spitting on them. While it's worth noting that she can jump quite far, a trait likely engineered into her experiment form since actual sheep don't typically possess such agility, there's no real evidence to suggest that Baba is particularly physically strong. And as for the many nightmare critters, their strength is practically non-existent. Sure, their sharp teeth make them a legitimate threat when they swarm the player, but at the end of the day, they're only tiny creatures who go splat just from being stepped on. Now, another character who seems physically weak at first glance is Pianosaurus. After all, we literally watched him get brutally tossed around by Doey the Doman. However, we need to consider the circumstances. Pianosaurus didn't see that attack coming, meaning he had no real opportunity to defend himself. In fact, according to his own toy commercial, stopping Pianosaurus would not be easy to pull off.
Would take an extinction-level event to stop this late Cretaceous composer.
Furthermore, a document found in Chapter 4 reveals that Pianosaurus was designed to fulfill a role similar to Experiment 1160, better known as Boxy Boo. Boxy's primary job was to eliminate troublesome employees, which obviously required physical strength. We can see just how powerful Boxy Boo is in the spin-off game Poppy Playtime, where he effortlessly hooks people in with his claws and leaps absurd distances, and of course there's his iconic ability to swallow people whole, as we saw with poor old Rowan Stoll. With this in mind, it's reasonable to assume that Pianosaurus also possessed significant strength during his lifespan, which explains why he aggressively charges at the player just moments before his demise. Additionally, in his teaser video, he visibly shakes when activating his piano keys, which implies that it requires a great deal of force. Taking all of this into account, it's entirely possible that had Pianosaurus been aware of the attack in advance, he might have actually been able to fend off or perhaps even defeat Doey the Doman, although the latter is unlikely. And speaking of Doey, it's clear that he possesses enough strength to completely destroy other experiments despite his dough-like texture. This might be due to the fact that, unlike most bigger bodies, Doey was created from 3 test subjects instead of just 1. This could mean that he has more bones in his arms than other experiments, giving him a major advantage in combat. One of the 3 test subjects, Matthew, was recorded as having excelled in all of the game station tests, obviously including statues, and as we established earlier, a high score in statues is proof of remarkable strength. Doey even demonstrated this firsthand by murdering the parents of Jack, another test subject who became part of him.
Open this door! Oh God, Susan!
But the most significant proof of Doey's strength comes from the fact that he was able to scare away the prototype twice during Chapter 4. Since the very first chapter, the prototype has been built up as a horrifying and deadly monster, the ultimate antagonist feared by many of the toys, and yet Doey managed to literally drive him away from the safe haven on multiple occasions. That alone speaks volumes of just how powerful he truly is, and of course we can't overlook the fact that he survived being crushed under a massive pile of falling debris. While it's possible that he protected himself by reshaping into a thinner form, the feat is still impressive nonetheless. Given his overwhelming strength, it's no surprise that the Doctor saw Doey as a major threat, even going as far as to setting up freeze traps throughout the factory in hopes that Doey would walk right into them.
He's made it impossible for me to get around here. Traps like this are everywhere. It's the cold that hurts. The big mean doctor knows that. It's okay. You're okay. It's all okay.
It's difficult to pinpoint exactly why the Doctor wanted to eliminate Doey in the first place, but the fact that he resorted to traps instead of confronting him directly only reinforces just how much Doey's enemies feared his strength. This solidifies him as the strongest experiment introduced in Chapter 4, even if he suffered a tragic death. As for everyone else, Yarnaby likely takes second place, followed by Pianosaurus in third, the Doctor in fourth, and his robot minions in fifth. And when it comes to the weakest toys, Baba Chop's ranked second to last, while the mini nightmare critters take last place, which, let's be honest, was probably expected. Who do you think the strongest Chapter 4 character is? Let me know in the comments. Also, check out this next video here and subscribe.